Good evening, everyone. I have read your reflective exercise number one and thoroughly enjoyed reading your papers about innovation and looking at your PowerPoints that were related to being persuasive about innovation as a basic principle of good practice. You guys did a great job. This is an assignment that just sometimes the logistics of attaching two files and getting everything loaded into Blackboard can feel a little nerve wracking. My hope is that you enjoyed having something different to do. So often in leadership positions, whether it's a formal leadership position or an informal position, we find ourselves using PowerPoints in our professional roles. One of the reasons we have this assignment in week 3 is to prepare you for week 5. So use the feedback that's been offered to you in your PowerPoint this week to make improvements so your PowerPoint that you're using for week 5 for your presentation is as polished as it can be. So be attentive to reading that feedback and integrating that feedback into change. That it was intentional to give you an early opportunity to get feedback about PowerPoint development. The papers were interesting as well. Lots of you covered the electronic medical record or the med scanning. So many interesting topics. My background is in mental health, so not a lot of innovative things kind of come into place with mental health. And normally, it's the med surg world that kind of comes in and changes things in a medical model for the patients that we provide care for. So it's always interesting to know what's going on the other side of the house. Your classmate. Oh, hang on, my screens are all scrunched up. Kimberly, who goes by Nicole Kellison, she did a really nice job in giving the Christian worldview about innovation. Her topic in her paper was about a sepsis protocol, and I believe two more of you wrote about sepsis protocols, which again was very interesting. Nicole wrote in her paper, as a Christian nurse leader, I am reminded in Scripture that education is used for reproof and to guide healthcare providers to work for the Lord. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 11 reminds us, "So shall my word that goes out of my mouth, it will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." Through innovation and nursing practice, patients are living longer and surviving sepsis. So often, how Nicole has wrapped this up is key. If we are doing innovation right, we have positive patient outcomes. We are using innovation in a meaningful way to improve patient outcomes. Even if we're using innovation in a business model, the final driver, the way where we measure all outcomes should be, does this change have a positive outcome for our patients? Can we drill it down to a positive outcome for our patients? And I think it's important to you to be aware that innovation is great. New and shiny is always interesting, but we need to use meaningful innovation, not just make change for change's sake. So I really appreciate Nicole's insight with that. From an AP standpoint, you guys are on pretty good footing. A few things I want to point out. Paper titles. I think I told several of you when you wrote your the title of your paper, Reflective Exercise Number 1, please begin to think about using a more descriptive paper title. And here's why. Paper titles are how people will find you if you ever publish a paper. And I know several of you are shaking your head going, that is never going to happen. You might surprise yourself. If you ever publish a paper, people are going to look for the topic of the content for you to be found in a search engine. So reflective exercise number 1 tells no one anything about what's in your paper. But let's say that you titled your paper, Nursing Intervention in the Emergency Room. Well, if you went into the Jerry Falwell Library and you used their search engine to look up nursing innovation, your article, if it were published, would show up in that search engine. And that's the reason we need to use appropriate paper titles. I suspect sometimes, it's a way to organize things so you know where everything belongs. If you need to use that process, that's great. It's okay for you to put reflective exercise number 1, semicolon, nursing innovation. Just try to be more creative with that. I do want you to get into the habit of that. DOIs and URLs. DOIs are how published papers are organized in an electronic format. If you are using a current article that has been published in the last 5 years, it is most likely going to have a DOI associated with it. Some international journals or some journals that are not frequently published do not use the DOI yet. But if it is a scholarly peer-reviewed journal and it is published routinely, there should be a DOI that's associated with that article within the last 5 years. So your first question when you're looking for an article that doesn't have a DOI is this really a scholarly article? Is this the best source I should be using to support my ideas? If you're sure that it is a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article published in the last 5 years, and there's legitimately no DOI, then you can use the URL from the search database that you've located it in, and you'll abbreviate that back up to the search engine that you're using, not put 4 lines of all that computer language for the website. It's important to get into the habit of that. Know that in our Blackboard site, under your course content, there's an additional information folder that gives you a website. It's called Crossref, and that will help you locate DOIs for papers that maybe you cannot find them in. So you'll open up Crossref, type in the name of the article and its author, and see if there's actually a DOI out there. That's the value of Crossref. It's a free search engine, and it does find the DOIs if they're missing. So make sure you take a look at that before you resign to the fact that there isn't one. Oh, in-text citations for authors. Lots of confusion with this. If you are using in-text citations for authors, for one author and for 2 authors, you put their name. For 2 authors, it's author 1 ampersand author 2. In parentheses, it's inside the sentence punctuation. If you have 3, 4, or 5 authors, the first time they're cited in your paper, you will list all of them, the last 2 separated by an ampersand, and the date. The second time you use that same set of authors, then you use just the first author and et al. Okay? If you have 6 or more authors, then it's always the first author, et al, and then the date, and then you move on. Okay? The 3 to 5 authors throw people, and it does make it easier to be able to cite them fully the first time and then only the first and et al afterwards. Just be attentive to that. You want to get into a good habit of using appropriate APA formatting when you're using in-text citations. I also know that it's really easy as you're writing and you're adding in-text citations, especially in lengthy papers. Sometimes you forget, oh, I've already used them earlier in the paper. So when you're done, just make sure you review your paper for consistency when you're using those in-text citations. I think that is all my APA stuff, all my notes. Next week you have your practicum log number 1. I want you to make sure that you go into your 623 course. Make sure that your all your time logs are correct from that course, and before you start your log for 624 for log 1, make sure you're entering your time correctly. Your time should be entered into the duration column and only be subdivided under goals and objectives or research or conferences if that has been approved. Nothing else should be in those columns unless you have used them for goals and objective development, and that has not occurred in this course, and unless you have research or conferences, and all of those things have to be pre-approved. So the only place that your time should be located is in the duration column. If for some reason you have errors in that format from 623, go ahead and fix those now so that when you're getting ready to finish 626, your columns line up and you have 200 hours in the right column. It's better to fix it now before you have to scramble in a couple of semesters and figure that out. Okay, so add that time in there, and then when you get ready to do your practicum logs, remember that first box is your goals box. You're only going to put the goals that you're directly working on during your practicum setting. The second box is your supportive narrative section. What goes in there is the logistics of what you've done. If you've been there 12 hours, it should look like you've been there for 12 hours. If you've been there for 2 hours, understand that I'm going to know that there's going to be less detail because you've only been there 2 hours. You're going to put the logistics of what you did. Then you're going to put self-reflection. So you're going to be able to talk about, these are the things I learned that I was surprised by. These were my pearls of wisdom. These were my aha moments. What kinds of insights did you gain? A couple of sentences about your self-reflection. The last thing you're going to do, put in that box in supportive narrative, is your prior learning. You're going to think back to courses that you've had in your graduate program that have helped you understand or give context to what you experienced in the practicum setting. So let's say you attended a business meeting that covered finance, and they were talking about the 2018-2019 budget, and they were talking about spreadsheets, and it was very involved. Well, an example of prior learning would be from Nursing 523 in your finance course. Perhaps you remember an assignment that helped you understand that, and you can reference that course and say, in Nursing 523, this is what I learned that helped me understand the conversations that they had during this business meeting. That's what we're talking about with prior learning. The last box is your application, and this is where you will go back and address what what ANA standards, I had to think which one they were, your ANA standards were addressed during your practicum time. Now bear in mind that if you did your goals and objectives correctly, you should already know exactly what standard has been addressed by reading your goals and objectives. You should have clarity in which one you should be talking about in your application section. So you want to be able to talk about, standard 2 relates to this experience that I had, and this is why it matters in the role of a nurse executive. This needs to be a well-developed section that talks about how your work is related to the ANA standards and how it matters in your professional development and in your practice. You cannot just say, this is the standard, this is what I did, and move forward. That's not an analysis, that's logistics. Okay, so make sure you spend some time doing a pretty good analysis there. Always make sure that the ANA has been used first and then properly referenced and cited in the body of this log. And I'm okay if you just put, the citation for the ANA in your very last entry, whatever works for you. Just make sure it is there somewhere. So that's the logistics of your practicum log. I hope that brief reminder helped freshen you and help prepare you. The last thing you've got is a short paper related to professional conflict. You are asked in part of it to address, the 10 stages of conflict and resolution process. It looks like this. It's a bunch of bubbles. Read this section of your reading before you try to figure out what kind of conflict to use, and make sure that you do not spend the majority of your paper telling me about these conflicts, about these 10 stages. I want you to tell me about the 10 stages in context of what occurred in your conflict within your workplace setting. As I said in my weekly intro, make sure that it's a big conflict. Make sure it's something that really shook the department or you, or it's the thing you think back to, and make sure that it aligns with some part of the conflict resolution process, so that you can hang things together so it makes sense. And then you've got a blip on strategic crisis management and then clinical error. Those are bullet points 2 and 3. Those are less substantial. They'll have their own section, but not require as much detailed analysis. The stages of conflict is a pretty big one. And it's also important because it is something that we all deal with. Conflict is huge professionally. So I do want you to be thoughtful about your approach to that and be intentional. That paper, just by the design of the rubric and the topic, lends itself to level 1 and level 2 headings and maybe level 3 headings. You should not be turning in any paper without headings, without appropriate level headings throughout your paper at this level in your graduate program, and you should be pretty adept at using level 1 and level 2. I have just realized that Gracie is snoozing on the back of my chair over my shoulder. I need to be more attentive to seeing what's in my surroundings before I start videoing it. So as you can see, it is nap time in my house here in Roanoke. I hope wherever you are that you are doing well. We are wrapping up week 3 in the middle of week 4's work. Know that I'm here. I am so aware that this is a crazy time for so many of you. Know that I'm thinking about you and I'm praying for you. If you have questions that are about logistics, the who, what, where, when, where, how, use the Ask the Professor link for that. Anything specific to your grade or to your own experience, do not hesitate to send me an email, and let's talk. We can talk by email or we can talk by phone, so that you can make sure that you're getting the support you need to make sure that you're successful in this course. I think I'm done. I hope you guys are well. Be in touch with questions or concerns. Have a great rest of your week.